The Sheriff's Last Report, a Sentinel trilogy short story, written by Brian Bullock. Sheriff Arden Calloway sat in her office at 11:47 p.m., staring at a file she was supposed to have closed 6 weeks ago. The coffee had gone cold hours ago. The heating system ticked and groaned the way it always did in December. Outside her window, Main Street Chateau was empty. The Christmas lights on the storefronts throwing multicolored reflections on the frozen puddles. She should be home. Her husband had stopped asking why she came home late because he already knew the answer. The Matthews case. The file in front of her was mostly black bars now, redactions over the information she'd gathered herself before the federal agents arrived and took everything. But they'd been sloppy, or maybe arrogant because they'd left her copies. The ones she'd made the night before they showed up, when she'd already understood that whatever she'd found in that clearing wasn't going to stay in her hands for long. 27 years as a cop, a decade in homicide in Billings before she moved to Teton County and ran for sheriff. She'd seen every kind of death and disappearance that humans could produce. Every accident and cruelty and failure of judgment that ended with someone gone. She had categories for all of it. Hard-won, expensive categories bought with years of looking at things most people never had to see. Braun Matthews didn't fit any of them. A man had walked into a clearing in his own county and not walked out. No return trail, no body, no signs of struggle. Just footprints ending in mid-stride at the edge of something that had no business existing. Fused soil, glassy and warm, in a perfect circle. And federal agents on scene within 12 hours, moving with the practiced efficiency of people executing a protocol they had run before. Not surprised. That was the thing she kept coming back to. They hadn't been surprised. She'd been through the photographs 100 times, the truck on the service road, the corridor of scorched vegetation leading into the trees. The crater, 40 feet across, compressed earth, the glassy center still radiating warmth in October cold. The footprints ending exactly where the glass began. She'd taken most of these herself, kneeling in the dirt with her service camera before the agents arrived and confiscated everything they could find. She hadn't given them everything. Old cop habit. You always made copies before you handed anything over, and you never told anyone you'd made them. It had felt like paranoia at the time. It felt like foresight now. She turned to a photograph near the back of the file. This one she'd taken almost as an afterthought. A wide shot of the truck from the side, capturing the driver's window and the tree line behind it. She'd looked at it a dozen times without seeing anything worth noting. Tonight something caught her eye. She reached into her desk drawer for her husband's magnifying glass. He used it for his model trains, would have laughed at her using it for a case, and held it over the photograph. There, in the reflection on the truck's dirty window, partially obscured by road dust and the angle of the afternoon light, but present if you knew what you were looking for. A shape in the sky behind the camera, elongated, smooth, no wings, no rotors, no visible means of staying in the air. Blurry from the low resolution of her copy, but the basic form was clear enough. She'd spent her career learning to read photographs. learning to see past the grain and the angle and the trick of light to the thing that was actually there. What was actually there was not a helicopter, not a plane. It had been there the whole time, hanging above the Montana wilderness on a clear October afternoon, and she had taken a photograph of it without knowing it, and looked at that photograph a dozen times without seeing it. And now she was sitting in her office at midnight holding a magnifying glass over a blurry copy of A Copy and Understanding. For the first time with her whole body rather than just her mind, what the federal agents had not been surprised by. They'd seen this before. Not this specific event, but this category of event. The warm crater, the missing person, the shape in the sky. They had protocols because they had precedents, and they had precedents because this had happened before. Somewhere, maybe many times, and someone in a building Arden would never be cleared to enter had decided that the American public did not need to know. She sat back and stared at the ceiling for a long time. The smart play was obvious. Destroy the photographs, bury the file, go home to her husband and sleep. The Federals had been careful not to threaten her directly. They were too professional for explicit threats. But the message had been clear enough. This matter is closed. Continued interest would be unwise. She'd been a cop long enough to know what unwise meant from a man in a dark suit holding a document she wasn't allowed to read. She'd also been a cop long enough to know that smart wasn't always right. Barbara Matthews had come to her office 2 weeks ago. Sat across this same desk with a folder full of phone records and bank statements and a photograph of her son from a birthday dinner, and had asked Arden quietly and without drama to tell her the truth about what had happened. Arden had told her the case was closed and the federal jurisdiction was beyond her reach, and she was sorry. She'd been sorry. She was still sorry. But she'd also been lying, and she was done with that. Arden opened her desk drawer and took out 3 USB drives. But it took 2 hours to copy everything. The photographs, all of them, including the one with the shape in the sky. The soil samples she'd managed to keep back sealed in evidence bags in the locked cabinet the Federals hadn't found. Her personal field notebook, photographed page by page. The observations and impressions and the details that hadn't made it into the official report because they were the kind of details you couldn't put in an official report without ending your career. Everything she had, everything she'd seen, everything she'd been sitting on for 6 weeks while she tried to decide what she was going to do about it. 3 drives, one for herself, hidden in a false panel she'd built into her home office desk and never told anyone about. Not even her husband, because there were things you protected people from by not telling them. One for a waterproof capsule she'd bury in the garden marked by a specific stone, waiting for the day it might be needed. And one for Barbara Matthews. That one was the point of the whole exercise. A grieving woman deserved to know that her son hadn't simply walked away. That what had happened to him was real and documented and known by people with the power to do something about it, who had chosen instead to file it under a classification level most senators never reached. that she wasn't crazy for refusing to close the file in her own head. Arden tucked the drives into her jacket and shut down her computer. The office was quiet except for the heating system and the wind off the empty street. She looked around at the space she'd occupied for 11 years. The photographs on the walls, the department commendations, the window that looked out on Main Street and the mountains beyond it. She'd built something here, something she was proud of. What she was about to do could end it. She thought about her father, who had ranched 40 miles east of here and had believed without complication that the truth was the truth regardless of who found it inconvenient. He'd taught her that some lines didn't move no matter who was standing on the other side of them. She picked up her jacket and walked out. She buried the second drive in the garden at 2 a.m., in frozen ground that took 20 minutes of work to break through. Her husband slept through it. He was a good man who had long ago made peace with not asking certain questions, which was part of why they'd lasted. After, she stood at the bedroom window and looked at the moon the way she'd been looking at it every night since October. It had been a fixture her whole life. Something that rose and set and lit up the dark, as predictable as anything in a world that had lately proven less predictable than she'd assumed. She still wasn't sure what to make of it now. Whether what she felt looking at it was instinct or projection or something she didn't have a category for. He wasn't dead. She knew that the way she'd known other things across 27 years of doing this work, not from evidence, not from reasoning, but from the accumulated weight of paying attention to the world until the world occasionally told you things it didn't tell people who weren't paying attention. Bron Matthews was alive. He was somewhere. And the shape in the sky in that photograph had taken him there. What she didn't know was whether anything she'd done tonight would matter. Whether the drives would be found before they were needed, whether Barbara Matthews would believe her, or whether the Federals would find out what she'd copied and come for all of it. She was a sheriff in a small county in Montana. She had copies of photographs and soil samples and a field notebook full of observations that didn't fit any existing category. She was one person who had seen something she couldn't unsee, doing the only thing she knew how to do with it, documenting it, preserving it, making sure it existed somewhere outside the reach of people who wanted it to disappear. It wasn't much, but it was what she had, and she'd done it, and that would have to be enough. She climbed into bed and lay in the dark next to her husband and listened to the wind off the mountains. In the morning she would find Barbara Matthews. Tonight she let herself sleep. 3 USB drives, one behind a false panel in a desk drawer waiting. One in frozen Montana ground, under a stone, waiting. One in the inside pocket of a sheriff's jacket, waiting to be handed to a woman who had not stopped looking and would not stop looking until she had an answer or ran out of time. The truth has a way of outlasting the people who try to bury it. Arden Calloway was counting on that. End. The Sheriff's Last Report is a short story set in the world of the Sentinel of Crater Daedalus, Book 1 of the Sentinel trilogy.